Kia ora. I'm Holly from the Ovarian Cancer Foundation New Zealand, and I'm very excited to bring you this webinar on the topic of sleep. Today's session will be presented by Dr. Leigh Signal from the Sleep Wake Research Centre, and she has over 30 years' experience in sleep research. Leigh will share her expertise, but please remember that it's no substitute for individual advice from your healthcare team. Now, over to Leigh.
To be able to share the knowledge that we have with different communities. So I greatly appreciate that. And thank you. So I'm going to step through two things this evening. I've listed them up here, and I'm going to start with talking a little bit about, what is healthy sleep? What does sleep look like? It's a really complicated, I think, incredibly interesting process. And then I'm going to talk about why sleep is so incredibly important to us, what drives the sleep process. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you can understand some of the drivers of healthy sleep, then you can use that to help inform some of your strategies and your tricks and tips. I'm going to touch on what we know about sleep in women with cancer. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we can do to support our sleep. I do have a bit of a spoiler alert though, and that is I don't have one single magic fix for a brilliant night's sleep. But hopefully some of the strategies that I'm going to provide to you are things that you can try. And I'd also really encourage you to share things amongst yourselves that you've found that work really well. Sleep is such an incredibly individual process. And so what works for me might be different for what works for you, but I think that we can get ideas from each other, and it's great to have like a whole toolbox of strategies and things that you can try. But I'll come back around to that in a little bit. So first, I'm going to start this evening by talking a little bit about sleep and what happens when we're sleeping. So sleep is a beautifully complex process, and it's comprised of two distinct states or types of sleep. And you probably or may have already heard these names. The first is non-rapid eye movement sleep, and it's abbreviated here as NREM. And in a healthy nighttime sleep, we'll spend about 3/4 of our night in this particular type of sleep. In this type of sleep, our brain activity is slower than it is during wakefulness, and the neurons tend to fire all together in big groups, and our heart rate and our respiration rate also decreases. So we think of a time as slowing and synchrony during non-REM sleep. Now, about the other quarter of night, we're going to spend in something called rapid eye movement sleep, or REM for short. During REM sleep, activity in our brain looks a lot more like it does when it's awake. So the neurons are firing off all over the place. And if I woke you from this type of sleep tonight, it's highly likely you'd be able to recall a dream. So we often call it dreaming sleep. However, our brains have an amazing mechanism that prevents messages from our brain to our skeletal muscles getting through. And that's for a very good reason. It's to stop you acting out those dreams. Now, it's called rapid eye movement sleep because if you've ever watched someone sleeping, you might notice sometimes the eyeball flicking around behind the closed eyelid, following what's happening during the dream, and hence the name rapid eye movement sleep. Moving back to non-REM sleep for a minute, we further divide it into 3 stages. And stages 1 and 2, you'll see them on the next slide in a moment, are called light sleep. And stage 3 is often called deep or slow wave sleep. So the use of those terms, light and deep sleep, reflect how easy it is to wake someone from those different stages of sleep. So if I woke you from light sleep this evening, tonight when you fall asleep, you'd probably tell me that you don't think you'd been asleep at all. But in contrast, if I woke you from stage 3 or that deep sleep, you might feel quite groggy or disorientated for a few minutes. And I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child and moved them from one location to the next, and they've not even woken at all. You're likely lifting them and moving them during deep sleep. We move through all those different types and stages of sleep throughout the night. And tonight, when you fall asleep, you're most likely going to enter sleep through those lighter stages of sleep. Here you can see on the side, they're called N1 and N2. You might spend about 20 minutes or so in those lighter stages of sleep before your brain is going to slow even further and into the first episode of N3 or deep sleep for the night. You spend about maybe 90 minutes in deep sleep before you might roll over and your brain moves back up into those lighter stages of sleep. And you'll probably have your first dreaming episode of the night. So here, dreaming episodes are marked in red, and you can see that we'll cycle through all of these stages of sleep throughout the night. And we'll move back after having a dream, back into light sleep, then to some more deep sleep, and back up into dreaming sleep again, and so on and so forth. And each of those cycles is about 90 minutes in length throughout the night. And we need all of those different types of sleep for us to feel restored the following day. But what you'll also notice is that we get most of our deep or N3 sleep in the first part of the night. Those episodes of deep sleep are longer and more predominant early in the night. And then you'll see that the dreaming sleep is becomes longer and more predominant towards the latter end of our nighttime sleep period. But we still need all those particular types of sleep, and we need to cycle through all of them for our sleep to be of good quality. That's a little bit about what's actually going on in sleep. So let's think about now sort of how much sleep do we need. And here I've provided some recommendations that come from the National Sleep Foundation. And what they've done is they've brought together a large group of sleep scientists like me, and they've looked at all the science out there across the different age groups to make recommendations around how much sleep should we be attaining at different ages in order to stay well and function at our best. And I've highlighted the ages of a young adult to and an adult here. But you'll see right across these age ranges and into older adulthood that we need somewhere between sort of 7 to 9 hours sleep. Most of us do, to feel our best and to function well. And that's used data from thousands and thousands of people and looked at lots of different outcomes to come up to draw those conclusions. So that's the orange boxes in the middle. But you'll see that there's some lighter coloured boxes either side. And what that's indicating is that there are some people who might need slightly less sleep, around 6 hours, and there might also be some people who need slightly more sleep on a regular basis, maybe 10 hours, and for younger people, maybe even out to 11. But sleep in the blue range, so sleep of less than 6 hours and more than about 10 hours, is considered to have implications associated with it. We can't function as well when we're getting less than 6 hours sleep per night, and sleep of longer lengths is often associated with something else going on in people's lives, generally health-related conditions. But I think the important point to make is that the amount of sleep we can get, 7 to 9 hours is quite a wide range. And most of us have a bit of an idea of how much sleep we ideally need to feel our best. Me, I'm a rock solid 8-hour sleeper. If I get less than that, I know that I'm starting not to function as well as I could. But it's not all about how much we get. We need to think about other facets of sleep as well. And we talk about sleep health as this kind of global concept. We often get focused on how much sleep we get. But it's also good to think about the quality of the sleep we're obtaining, about being able to fall asleep and stay asleep at night, thinking about when we're sleeping in the 24-hour day and night cycle, about sleeping about the same time each night. And sleep health is also about how good we feel about our sleep. We've all probably got a pretty good idea about whether last night's sleep was okay or not. And we certainly definitely know when we've had a pretty hard night and we haven't got as much sleep as we'd ideally like. And the other concept, the last concept of sleep health that we talk about there is our daytime perception of how we're doing, how sleepy we feel during the day. And the reason that we talk about all of those things is that we now know that all of those different facets of sleep have important relationships to our health and well-being. So that when we're experiencing significant feelings of daytime sleepiness, it's related to our ability to function well during the day as well. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what driving our sleep be at night and to be hopefully as consolidated as possible. And the first thing I'm going to talk about two processes. First one I'm going to talk about is an internal drive for sleep. And it builds up across the course of the waking day. And then that drive for sleep reduces during the night when we're sleeping. If you think of it as a little bit like the idea of hunger or thirst, when you go without something for a period of time, if you go without food for most of the day, you're going to start to feel really hungry. If you go without water, you'll start to feel quite thirsty. And we know that the longer we stay awake, the sleepier that we are going to become. So if you had perfect night's sleep last night, you're going to start at, down here at 0 effectively. And then the brain's drive for sleep is going to slowly build across the day. And then tonight, when you fall asleep, the brain is going to be able to replenish itself and that drive for sleep will decrease. And it does most of that work about removing that drive for sleep in that deep or slow wave sleep. And that's one of the reasons that we think it gets prioritized and happens in the early part of our night. If I keep you awake for much longer than normal, what's going to happen is that drive for sleep is going to keep building and building and building. And eventually, your brain's going to say, I need some sleep. And no matter where you are and what you're doing, that drive for sleep is going to initiate maybe only short bursts of sleep, but you might be, driving a car or doing something safety critical. If you've stayed awake for an excessively long period of time, this drive for sleep is eventually going to take over and say, I'm really sorry, but your brain desperately needs some sleep, and it's going to take it in little bits. Now, there's a second process that's also working in conjunction with this drive for sleep, and it's called the circadian timekeeping system. And in fact, every cell in our body effectively has a little clock inside it, and it's helping it stay in step with the day-night cycle. So every cell has a clock inside it, but there's a master clock or a master pacemaker that's located deep inside our brain. And it's like the coordinator of all the clocks throughout our body. and it keeps the clocks in our stomach in time with the clocks in our heart, in times with the clocks in our pancreas, and it keeps them doing the right jobs at the right time so that we, even before we wake up in the morning, our digestive system's turned on and it's ready to receive food. Our pancreas is producing some cortisol and our hormone levels, rise. And so all our physiological processes generally have a 24-hour rhythm, and they are coordinated and controlled largely by the clock deep in the brain. And that clock doesn't quite keep perfect time, and so it slips a little bit, and it can be stretches out to being a little bit longer than 24 hours if we weren't living in a normal day-night cycle. And what it uses is it uses daylight as a cue to help it lock on and stay in step with the normal day-night cycle. So we have some amazing cells in the back of our eye that aren't actually used for vision, that send a message via a direct pathway to this clock deep in our brain. And so it's getting messages about the light around us to tell it to stay in step with the day-night cycle. An important point here is that it is daylight, outside light, that is the strongest and most important cue. But I'll come back to talking a little bit more about light later on. The brain also uses other cues. It uses cues such as when we're eating, when we're interacting with other people, when we're being physically active, when we're at work, to also provide information to the clock in the brain. But light is the most important one of all. As well as creating rhythms in digestion and hormonal release, one of the rhythms that we're most aware of is when we sleep and when we're awake. So what I've shown you here is that alerting rhythm from that clock deep in the brain. And you can see that on the side of the graph, that when the line here I've drawn is the alerting signal. And so when it's in this direction, we're showing high alertness. And when it comes down this way, it's low alertness. Across the day, alertness levels are reasonably high. We have a little dip, sort of about 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when it might be easier to fall asleep. And it's certainly a time, I'll come back to this again, a great time if you need to take a nap is within that dip in alertness. And then we have alertness continuing to increase across the waking day. And it's a great thing to be happening because if you'll remember from when I talked about the internal drive for sleep, it's building and building and building across the day. And so that we don't fall asleep during our dinner or right now when I'm talking to you, the circadian clock's countering it and it's really pushing our alertness up to help us stay awake across the remainder of the day. And then it switches off and it decreases its alerting signal and it allows sleep to happen across the nighttime window. And so alertness for all of us is lowest in the early hours of the morning. So if you had to stay awake all night long, this is the time when you'd struggle the most, about sort of 3 to 5 a.m. in the morning when it's really difficult to stay awake. And then even if you continue to stay awake, you'll find about sort of 7 o'clock in the morning, you start to feel slightly more alert again. And that's, again, your alerting signal switching back on and promoting wakefulness. So what that does is there's windows for sleep, but there's also times for wake. So the clock is driving times of greater alertness. And like I said, one of those is in the evening. But the implications of that are that sometimes, I don't know if you've ever done this, and I still do it despite the fact of everything I know about sleep and the timekeeping system, is if I've got an early flight in the morning and I'm thinking, right, I'm going to go to bed a little bit earlier than usual because I want to try and get enough sleep. and you go to bed earlier, and then you find that you stare at the ceiling until your normal bedtime, and then you eventually fall asleep around your normal bedtime. And that's because you've probably gone to sleep when your circadian system is still really trying to drive alertness. And then the other time that it's really difficult to either fall asleep or stay asleep is sort of late morning, around midday. And for anybody who has had to work at night and then try and sleep during the day, what often happens is they get a bit of sleep after they get home from work, but then they get woken up by that alerting signal from the clock, sort of around at midday time. Now, as well as those two sort of biological processes being the key drivers of sleep, both that internal drive and that circadian timekeeping system, there's a bunch of other things that really do impact how much sleep we get and its quality, and I've listed them all here. We know that as we get older, sleep can get trickier. Our brains don't seem to be able to produce as much of that deep, slow wave sleep. And so we're spending more of the night in the lighter stages of sleep, and we're also more easily woken because we're spending more time in those lighter stages. Things like caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, and many medications can also have an impact on our sleep. Caffeine can stay in our system for quite a long time, and so therefore having it too close to bedtime can make either falling asleep difficult, or it can actually lighten our sleep. Many people claim that they can still have, coffee after dinner and have no difficulty falling asleep. And that might be true, but their sleep's probably lighter in those lighter stages of sleep compared to their sleep without caffeine. And alcohol is another one that certainly has implications for sleep. It can make us feel sleepy, but alcohol prevents our brain having that REM or dreaming sleep. So if you've got too much alcohol on board, your brain won't be able to produce dreaming sleep until it's metabolized or got rid of the alcohol. And the consequences can be that your brain then has a sort of a catch-up or rebound effect. And then the second half of your night can be a bit more disturbed because now your sleep structures are all a little bit out of whack, and it's trying to get that amount of REM sleep that it needs. I'm going to come back to our sleep environment, and I will also talk a little bit about our health status, because certainly our health and experiencing cancer has significant impacts on our sleep. And I will also talk about common sleep disorders. But our daily routine can also impact our sleep. Being, physically active is beneficial for nighttime sleep. And eating well is also associated with good nighttime sleep. And things like stress and anxiety can make sleep more difficult. And again, I'm going to come back to that point. And our personal circumstances, perhaps caregiving, small children, pets, all those sorts of things can have implications for getting sufficient sleep at night and staying asleep. Alrighty. So why is sleep so incredibly important? We spend, nearly a third of our lives doing this thing. Somebody who is about 80 years of age will have spent about 27 years of their life asleep. So there has to be a very good reason for doing this thing, sleep. And there's this great quote from a famous sleep scientist, Alan Reichstafen, which says, "If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake that the evolutionary process has ever made." And here I've listed a number of things that we know are phenomenally, sleep is phenomenally important for. So it doesn't just serve just one vital function. We now know that there are multiple vital functions that sleep serves. And what's really important to understand is that these things can only happen when we're asleep, and they can't be done when we are awake. So, for example, sleep has a vital role in learning. So, your ability to remember what I tell you here will be largely determined by how well you sleep tonight, because you'll take that information and you're going to process it and replay it tonight during your sleep. You'll link it to other information that you already have stored in your brain, and you'll help embed it in your memory. And your brain spends the time asleep sort of both becoming more efficient and organizing itself. We know that during dreaming sleep in particular, the brain is connecting a new information with existing information. That's where often we see, things like creativity and problem solving. You may have an issue that you're trying to figure out, and we talk about sleeping on it. And it's surprising how well, that the following day you feel like suddenly you've got a solution or a better way of looking at an issue after some sleep. We know sleep is incredibly important in emotional regulation. In our brains, there's a place called the amygdala, which is where emotional reactions are largely regulated. And in studies of brains asleep, we've used MRI scans to look at what happens to the amygdala. And they've compared people who have gone without sleep with people who have had sufficient sleep. And what they found is that the amygdala, or that emotion producing part of the brain, becomes hyperreactive when we go without sleep. And why that is happening is because the control part of our brain, which is the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, stops sending signals to the amygdala. And so it's normally responsible for keeping the amygdala in check. It's like the brake on our emotions. And when it stops sending these controlling signals, the amygdala gets slightly out of control and it goes into overdrive. And we also know that sleep is like an emotional first aid. If you experience a significant emotional event during the day, then that event is replayed and processed largely during dreaming sleep. Now, you remember the event, you store the information about the event, but that REM sleep and that replaying seems to soften the emotions associated with it. So it's like turning the volume down on significant events. We know that during sleep, important waste products are able to be removed. And it's like thinking of the body as a really busy instruction site during the day. So lots of stuff is being created and built and done during the day. But during the night, the workers have to come out and clean up. And it's about organizing and storing and reordering and setting things up so that, again, the construction site can be a functional, place the following day. So what do we know about sleep in people with cancer? A little bit of a dive into some of the science that has been done in this space. And certainly the most common theme is that sleep disturbance is widely reported and well recognised in all forms of cancer. I looked for studies that were completed in women with ovarian cancer. And what I'm showing here on the left-hand side is some results from a study of nearly 200 women who had originally had a pelvic mass that was suspicious for cancer. And it followed them from that point in time and asked them about their sleep prior to surgery, and then at 6 months and 1 year after diagnosis. So what you can see here is that prior to surgery, about 3/4 of people report significantly disturbed sleep, with about a third of those reporting very severely disturbed sleep. The good news is that the rates of really disturbed sleep did drop at 6 months and 1 year, but they still remained relatively high. So at 6 months post-surgery, about 60% of people were still reporting sleep disturbance, and similar kind of rates, just slightly higher at 1 year post-diagnosis. Another study that I found asked people to rank the symptoms that they were experiencing, and sleep disturbance was the third most severe symptom from a list of 22 symptoms that people were asked about. Now, on the right-hand side, what I'm showing you is sort of an amalgamation of information from a few different studies and looking at how sleep issues might change across the cancer trajectory. I think the most common theme that was coming through is the persistence and the experience of insomnia. Now, insomnia is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. It can be early morning awakenings with the inability to resume sleep, or generally non-restorative sleep despite having sufficient opportunity for sleep. And insomnia, when it's clinically defined, also results in daytime difficulties as well. So up to 50% of people with ovarian cancer report insomnia at right across the cancer trajectory. In the sort of pre-diagnosis phase, fatigue is one of the symptoms commonly experienced. And then around diagnosis, the anxiety and the distress that people are experiencing can contribute to the difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. Then during the treatment phase, the sleep disturbances are largely associated with the side effects of either surgery or chemotherapy. It might be caused by pain or discomfort, or even the onset of menopause symptoms, producing hot flushes and night sweats. There's also can be disturbances to the timing of sleep. During treatment, people have less exposure to daylight often, and so that the timing cue to the circadian clock may be disrupted. It's also been reported that insomnia symptoms in people with ovarian cancer can persist for years after their treatment, and that persistent insomnia can be intertwined also with experiences of depression and anxiety, and also ongoing fatigue. And insomnia is important, particularly because it is tightly linked to changes in mood. We know that difficulty sleeping is related to mood changes, and that mood changes then can lead to difficulty sleeping, creating this vicious cycle between the two. And difficulty sleeping is also associated with things like greater pain perception, and may have an impact on things like immune functioning. So I feel a little bit foolish telling people about the sleep-related changes that happen during ovarian cancer, given that many of you may have experienced these. But I hope you find that it's validating in terms of that these are consistently and clearly reported in the literature. I'm going to shift now to the last part. I'm going to just talk about what we can do to support our sleep. And I'm going to hopefully frame it slightly differently. I don't have a tick box of things that you must do or should do to improve your sleep. I think we should reframe how we think about sleep a little bit. And the first thing I hope that we've tried to do with the presentation today is understand the value of sleep. So good sleep allows us to do the things that are important to us, and good sleep allows us to be healthy and active. So if we understand the value of it, then hopefully we'll make time for it. So it's thinking about how do we fit this really important function into our incredibly busy lives. It's also really important to think about personalizing it. Like I said earlier, everybody's really different, and it is going to be, in relation to improving your sleep, a little bit about figuring out what works for you. And it's really okay to experiment, try things out, try sleeping for a bit longer, try sleeping for less. Try sleeping, thinking about the timing. Do I need to go to bed a little later? Do I need to go to bed a little earlier? It's okay to try things out when it comes to sleep. It's also okay for sleep not to be perfect all of the time. It doesn't have to be perfect every night in order for us to get the benefits of it. We also need to trust that on most occasions, our brain knows how to do this thing called sleep. But when sleep isn't working well and you're struggling with falling asleep or staying asleep, we don't want to you to stay in bed and feel anxious or stressed about not being able to sleep. So one of the key messages is to get out of bed, go somewhere comfy, stay warm, do something quiet until you feel sleepy, and then go back to bed again. We don't want to create a link between lying in bed feeling stressed with trying to fall asleep. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here is having a bit of what we call a light armor to protect our sleep. And that's about doing the healthy sleep habits things. Sleep loves a pattern. It loves regularity and it loves consistency. Either that's before bedtime, and it's also about the timing of sleep, trying to go to bed and go to sleep about the same time each night and get up about the same time each morning. And think about putting the day to bed before your sleep. So erasing mine is one of the biggest enemies of sleep. So some of the things that we can do in terms of thinking about our environment is trying to keep our bedroom reasonably cool. We really want to contrast between days and nights. We want to have daylight during the day, and then we want to make sure our rooms are as dark as possibly can. Simple things like earplugs and white noise are great for screening out noise. Think about the place you sleep in and making it as comfortable as you possibly can. Use pillows and cushions and blankets and whatever works for you to make your bed comfortable. I've talked about routine, and I've also briefly mentioned relaxation, but there are lots of apps out there that you can try and lots of different methods, different relaxation processes that might involve breathing or listening to different things to help calm a busy mind. If you're struggling during the day, think about things. How can I move or be active if I need to stay awake? Can I check in with somebody else? Can I shift this task? Can I have conversations with people to help me get through this moment? Can I turn up the lighting a little bit because that's alerting? Can I turn down the temperature a little bit because that also helps? But these are all things that will just get you through for a short period of time. And also, if you're in a workplace, it's important not to be afraid to be able to speak up, to say that you're struggling with fatigue and that you might need some support. I'm going to really briefly talk about the last couple of things, and one of those is napping. And if you feel like you're not getting enough good sleep at night, a nap is a great way of topping up And even really short amounts of sleep, as little as 6 minutes, have been proven to be beneficial. And if you do need to get up and get going after you've had a nap, we recommend you try and get the amount of time you're trying to sleep for to about 20 to 40 minutes. And that's going to stop your brain entering that deep sleep and minimize the chances of you feeling really groggy and disorientated after waking. But if you've got longer amounts of time, then longer naps are definitely more beneficial. You just need to make the trade-off between not sleeping for too long during the day and impacting nighttime sleep. But that might depend on how you're feeling and where you are in your recovery process. When you're napping, think about where you're napping. Try and make it the best environment you can for napping, and use your good sleep habits about having a routine. Realize that you might feel a little bit groggy afterwards. And as I mentioned before, consider how it might impact your nighttime sleep. And if you're really struggling, and I'm not suggesting people take up caffeine wildly, but caffeine can be a good way of helping you get through a period of time where you do need to be awake. We say start with a single cup of coffee, which is about 100 milligrams. It takes a few minutes to kick in. We're all differently sensitive to caffeine. So listen to your body. Think about when you might next need to sleep, because it takes a while, several hours, for caffeine to be processed and get out of your system. But if you're really struggling, and you can also bundle caffeine with a nap. So you can actually have some caffeine first and then have a short nap of 15 to 20 minutes. And by the time you wake up, you've got both your caffeine kicked in and you've got some of the benefits of sleep on board as well. I'm just going to finish with a slide about where to go from here. The top two links are good websites that I have faith in terms of great scientific information that support a range of different sleep-related questions. They're both Australian. The Principles of Good Sleep is a really cool little animation that explains basically trying to value sleep in our lives. And because insomnia is often so prevalent in ovarian cancer, I've put up a couple of different links there. The first one is to an online course that provides a free information that you can step through to help you with managing insomnia symptoms. And the last two links are to recognised clinical psychologists who are specially trained in helping people with insomnia. So if you've got severe difficulties, persistent difficulties with your sleep, and you feel that you need further support, seeking a clinical psychologist with appropriate training can be really helpful. So I'm going to leave it there, and I will make sure that Holly has all my slides so that you can have those links, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Leigh. Yes, if anyone has any questions, please do send them in via either the Q&A or the chat feature. One question that we've got, Leigh, is you mentioned if you're not able to fall asleep to kind of get up and stop. Are there any sort of cues or timings that would tell you it's a good time to get up and try something else?
The general rule of thumb is to not lie there for longer than about 30 minutes. And so if you're still struggling to sleep after 30 minutes, then you should get up and go into another room. And yeah, it is tough. I mean, I've had insomnia, in the past, and getting out of a warm bed and going somewhere else is a very unattractive option. But if you are experiencing that and you think it's likely, I'd do some pre-planning. I'd do something like having a snuggly dressing gown and your warm slippers by your bed, thinking about where you might go, having a woolly blanket on the couch, having a podcast ready, so that if you're really struggling, you can take yourself out of your bed. You know you're going to be warm and okay if you go and sit on the couch in another room. and you've got a podcast and something quiet to do, so that you can then, relax, listen to that, and hopefully it won't take long. You'll feel sleepy and you can go back and try sleeping again.
Awesome. Thank you. I don't think we've got any other questions at this point. So thank you so much for your time, Leigh. That has just been incredible. Really, really fantastic to be able to share your knowledge with our community. And yes, we will have this recording up on the website soon, so you'll be able to check back if you need to check anything. Thank you so much, Leigh.
Great. No problems. Thank you. And thank you for your time.
Good night.